Vidorant's Vault, an adventure from keys from the Golden Vault. In fact, it's a heist adventure where the player characters are hired by someone by the name of Goldenbeard to recover a trophy, a ruby diadem, rightfully belonging to him, from the thief, Nixalana Vidorant, and her Silver Finger Society Thieves Guild. This is an adventure for 5th edition. It can be run in 2014 or 2024 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons. You can see by this image here, two adventurers, in this case a dragonborn and an elvish character, climbing up a ladder to the balcony of Vidorant's vault, where some experienced guards are conversing and not necessarily paying attention. This heist adventure can take place in any city you wish to place it. As you see, there is a tie-in for the Golden Vault storyline. I don't feel like this is necessary. Many of the adventures in this overall anthology are better piecemeal than as a general whole. You'll note, by the way, if you ever run any of these adventures, many of which fit nicely into very specific campaign settings. This adventure really fits into any campaign setting. It doesn't have a solid theme, but for example, Axe from the Grave fits nicely with Curse of Strahd. Prisoner 13 fits nicely and actually takes place in Icewind Dale for Rime of the Frost Maiden. And in addition, adventures like Heart of Ashes fits nicely in Curse of Strahd, and you can look through the list for the other adventures. Shard of the Cursed fits fairly well with the Radiant Citadel campaign, as it ties into one of the adventures in that adventure. But for this adventure, it can either be part of an ongoing story of heists, or it can just be part of your ongoing Dungeons and Dragons campaign when the player characters get to around 7th level. Now, they will get an invocation to meet with the head of the Silverfinger Society, Samfers Goldenbeard, a dwarven noble, who more or less wants to hire them again to get his ruby diadem back. Now, there is some text about what he says to them, but it really doesn't matter. That you can use the standard text, or you can just come up with it out of your head. The important thing is he wants his diadem back, and he's willing to pay the player characters 2,000 gold to do it for a diadem that may only be worth about that much gold. It's more of a sentimental value, I guess. Now, there's a lot of preparation in an adventure like this, that you can gather information on the different guards that are on patrol, most of which are human. One is a dwarf, one is a gnome, one is a halfling. You are given, player characters that is, a map of said vault with some question marks in the middle. Player characters can access the balcony on the second story fairly easily, or they could go in through a front door. There do not appear to be any back doors. As the player characters are going into the vault, they can choose again which direction they want to go into, and they can case the joint as the adventure suggests. Ceilings are 15 feet tall, have wooden doors, unless they happen to be made of metal. The interior is lit by oil lamps, or I should say continual flame lamps, and there are some wards within this particular vault to make teleportation and planar travel difficult, or not completely impossible. There are very few windows. As you go into the interior, like many of the adventures, it gives you some pretty good information of how to set up the interior and the different bits of information for that. Here's the DM's map and essentially the player's map, one with a grid, one without. Obviously, you're going to want to use the one on the right because the one on the left effectively shows where various traps are and the numbered locations. Use the one on the right as a result. As you're going through the different rooms, there are a number of guards on the first floor as well as the balcony that are on patrol. The guards will not stay in any one room. They are guarding the main entrance as well as the balcony, and they are moving around. It suggests where they could be in the adventure, or initially found, but the DM should be open to having them switch rooms, especially if the player characters somehow do some scrying. This keeps the adventure a little looser, and there may be some surprises that way. As the players go through the adventure, there are a few traps, including a fire trap with some statues. This is a poison trap here that you find in the gem room, where there are a considerable amount of gems the player characters could recover. There's a scroll and potion room. This is some fantastic potions and scrolls that the player characters could get. Due to the amount of treasures in this location, the player characters don't necessarily need to be hired by Golden Vault or Golden Beard either. They could just hear that there's a lot of treasures being kept here. For example, if maybe the Silverfinger Society is a thieves guild that the player characters have had run-ins with before, perhaps they decided to strike against the vault for its treasures. There's a document room with a number of interesting letters. What's great about this room and some other rooms is these letters, the disputed will, the bribe, the information on Golden Vault secrets, the love letters, these are all great future campaign hooks, which may or may not be how or what they were intended for, but they, for a good campaign, these are going to throw in a lot of possibilities of what the player characters, what they can do next. Now you'll note, here's the fire-breathing statues. There's more treasure in this particular room, in the gallery. In this case, some paintings. There's an armory with some magical weapons in it, and oddly, a suit of +1 scale mail, which is just a bizarre magical piece of armor. I don't understand who would ever enchant scale mail in this edition. There is a zoo of creatures. Note that two of them are displacer beasts. Some are giant lizards, flying snakes, and the like. I would take the displacer beasts out of this room and place them in another location. Player characters are likely to kill them just because they'll probably want their displacer beast cloaks. And if they're too easy to kill, then it's not really a challenge to get those cloaks. And displacer beast cloaks in 5th edition are very valuable and very much in demand. I would place them in Vidorant's personal chambers. That way, they're more defending creatures rather than creatures that are trapped in cages. The other creatures in the cages are less important. There is, of course, a library with some interesting books. There is a trap that could set off an invisible stalker. These texts here could be quite interesting. And again, they could also be adventure lead for, later adventures. There's a pit here with some spikes and an illusion over part of it. You have the stairwell, you have the balcony itself where some of the guards are. You do have Vidorant's quarters, where again I suggest putting the displacer beasts. And then this picture shows you some of the display cases where some of the other treasures that Vidorant has captured are kept, including the diadem right here, and a very interesting book, and a treasure map, amongst other things. Now, these items, like the letters found earlier, are excellent campaign leads for, like I said, future adventures, which could be very interesting. For example, the jeweled human skull. The player characters may not have much on that, but they could look into it, or perhaps it ties into a later adventure. The royal scepter might have something to do with a later adventure. There's a map here that the player characters could look into. The only real magic item is really this Thesis of Morton Sore, which might be a necromancer that maybe he comes back later in the storyline looking for this book. And there happens to be a spell scroll of sequester within the book itself, or as part of the book, I should say. It's not actually in the book. It does have magical value at that point. Now, at some point, Vidorant shows up. She is an elven assassin, and she essentially has a magical ring that acts as a helm of teleportation, which it says that only she can attune to, but as a DM, I would probably make it very loose that it maybe only an elf could attune to, or maybe just allow the players to attune to it if they wish to use that ring later on. If the player characters are above 7th level, I would suggest having her arrive with some assistance. This is Dixalana Vidorant herself, and she makes a decent villainous boss. She could also be used as an ongoing NPC up to this point, sort of a femme fatale character. This illustration was, by the way, illustrated by Evan Fong. Got some information on her as well, and effectively, she has a ring of evasion as well, and some gloves of thievery. So she has some decent magical equipment. I personally am not a fan of the single enemy boss fight, unless it's something like a very powerful solo creature, like, say, a dragon with legendary actions. Many groups will try to use their overwhelming numbers against enemies like this, and so I would give her some additional help of some sort. It could be that maybe she has a gem that summons a fire elemental or something like that with her to make it so that she isn't just alone when she and just is going to get stabbed to death by a bunch of player characters. Not that every group is like that, but many groups can be like that. Now, overall, the adventure is, it's a heist. It's player characters raiding a treasury that doesn't belong to them. Generally, player characters tend to like adventures like this for that reason, because there's lots and lots of treasure they can get, and it ties into a lot of other possibilities for future adventures. Now, overall, I would rate this adventure a 4 out of 5. I would rate it a 5. It was a larger adventure, and it didn't have the final boss being just Vidorant, who feels like a weak final boss for a 7th level group, especially if there's more than 4 player characters. And it is interesting, in my opinion, that there are so many good campaign hooks. I ran this adventure recently with a campaign, and we haven't done any hooks yet, but that is my intention in the adventure, is that these things are going to come back and be, at least some of them, be tied to future adventures. And I'd suggest, if you're running this, to do the same, because it would be almost, well, it's the opportunity presents itself, is the best way to put it. Now, guys, if you like these reviews and other things that I put up on this channel, please like this video and subscribe for more content.